Early on in my time at the Department of Corrections, I was on my way to a reentry conference, and my son, at that time, who was a young teenager, asked me what I was planning to do that day, and I told him I was going to a reentry conference, and he asked me what that was. And so I asked him, I said, what do you think reentry means? What does that mean to you? And at the time, the only thing he could think of was the space shuttle. And so he said, oh, that's what the space shuttle does. It re-enters, right? I mean, so we had this conversation about the space shuttle and re-entry. And the more I thought about that metaphor, the more I thought it was pretty realistic to what happens to offenders as they're leaving prison. That, we know that from all of our watching science movies and everything else, that when the space shuttle re-enters, if it doesn't do so exactly right, with the right trajectory, it burns up and it's a catastrophe. If it's done right, it lands safely and successfully, and often that's the same case for the offenders that we're working with. They leave that prison and re-enter the orbit or the atmosphere of real life, and if that trajectory isn't done just right, they will burn up and it will be a catastrophe. But if done right, they can re-enter society effectively and well, and Sponsors does a tremendous job of providing that trajectory that allows them to re-enter in the right sort of way with the right sort of supports. As I talked to offenders who were preparing for release, many of them were very nervous about the experience they were going to go through, about what was going to be waiting for them on the other side. When you've asked somebody to go out and get a job, find a place to live where you're not associating with other felons, that meets all the appropriate requirements of their terms and conditions of supervision, but you haven't provided any of those resources, or the community lacks those resources, you're really raising the likelihood of reoffense by the offender, their failure, a likelihood of returning back to the community, and unfortunately, in many cases, the creation of new victims. What Sponsors offers is this safe environment that they can return to, where there is safe and supportive housing, where they have access on site to individuals who can help them access the necessary resources in the community that they need. They can look for jobs. They can use the resource room. For the women's facility, they've got access to on-site parenting classes. They've got access to a space where they can have safe visits with their children. They can take advantage of the general sense of community that Sponsors offers to help them manage that. Sponsors, I think, and good reentry-oriented programs try to help us unwind some of the negative aspects of institutionalization, and you do that by the quality of the facilities that you ask them to stay in, by treating them with respect and giving them the dignity that they need, by giving them as much freedom as they can handle in the moment, by appropriately holding them community accountable for their behavior. One of the things that I think makes Sponsors unique is this recognition that often people are in prison not for just one challenge or problem, because every inmate, every offender has their own unique set of needs and challenges, whether it be education, mental illness, alcohol and drug abuse, difficulty with associates, family challenges, or a number of other risk factors that have been involved in ultimately them ending up in prison. Sponsors has really identified how to provide an assessment of all of those needs and then tailor a delivery system to those offenders that meets their individual specialized needs, that will lower their risk factors and ultimately make them more successful as they return to community. So when one thinks about the reentry issue, really, if you take away sort of the social justice and the issues of the heart and morality, and you just think about it purely from a public safety and business standpoint, the economics of reentry make a lot of sense. In the long view, we ought to be really focusing on prevention-related strategies that keep people out of prison, that strengthen families, that provide youth appropriate opportunities to keep them off the track of going to jail or going to prison. But we can't forget the fact that we've got a population that already exists that didn't necessarily get those intervention strategies when they were younger, and they can't be ignored. And we ignore them at our peril from a public safety standpoint. So I think the argument simply is this constant reminder that for every dollar we spend on reentry and on services to provide supports for these offenders who are leaving either prison or jail and returning to community, we're saving money because of the reduction in recidivism that will come from these people being successful. good reentry strategies and good reentry services enhance the public safety of a community. So instead of ignoring this population, which often society wants to do, we need to pay closer and better attention to them, because we're safer, they're safer, the outcomes are better, and the expenses are lower for a whole community as a result of it.